or afternoon or evening, whenever you are watching it. Whatever it is, I hope it is good. So, whoa, sorry, I forgot I had so many windows open. So, this is your video for your notes for chapter 2, or reading number 2, sorry, which is page 7 in your notebook. It should look like this. Now, I have some somewhere, I swear, that I already filled out. Okay, so this is what we're going to look at. So as I walk through these notes, just go ahead and write them down in your copy. Make sure that you have these. If at any point you need to pause the video and just write down what I have written, that is perfectly fine. So in reading number 2, which is page 7 in your workbook, arrival on Himmel Street, growing up a Salmage setting. So setting is time and place of a story. We know that. That was in our literary terms. But setting affects the characters, it creates a tone/mood, and it develops/drives conflict. And this makes sense to us, especially when we think about stories like The Interlopers that we read a couple weeks ago. It wouldn't have been the same story if it didn't have the setting that it had, because it was set in winter, it was set in the forest, all of that affected the characters. Their conflict, they had an example of man versus nature when that tree fell on them. If the story had been set in the Bahamas, it probably wouldn't have happened that way. So now that we know what setting is, it can also extend beyond just time and place. It can also include several other elements. The first one is geographical. Country, state, house, basement, rural, or urban. And then you have physical, which means is it day or night, is it weather or season, cultural/political, values, ideals, attitudes, politics, and then historical, time period, year, major events. You also have time, which means time elapsed, time of day, flashbacks, and between scenes. I'm going to see if I can pull it up and make it a little bit prettier, easier to see. Hopefully, okay, this is better. It's a little bit bigger. Okay, so in this box, this is a lot of information. You're not going to know all of this information for every setting, but it's good to keep in mind that setting can include these things. Now, based on the second reading that you did, which was reading number 2, sorry, just got an email, and you can check what those page numbers were. But based on reading number 2, we encountered 2 different settings, and so now we're going to take some notes on what each setting looks like and what information we got. And so I'm going to go all the way through setting 1, and then I'm going to go all the way through setting 2. So setting 1 was the graveyard. It's where they bury Liesel's brother. Geographical location, it's in Nazi Germany. It's near Munich, which is a city in Germany. It is a graveyard. You don't have to write that twice if you don't want to. It's already up there. It's a very rural area. There's not a lot of people around, and it's next to the train. Physical, it's daytime or afternoon, really. It's winter, it's snowy and cold, and this definitely affects the mood, because when the narrator tells us that it was a dark winter day, it wasn't very warm outside, we immediately are thinking of those cold winter days when you just think winter is never going to end. And so physical setting here definitely affects the mood. Cultural/political, Nazi Germany, politics. Communists were being persecuted, and it was dangerous to have very different ideas. In Nazi Germany, if you didn't agree with what Hitler said, or if you didn't believe the same things that he said, he wanted you eliminated. And so it was very dangerous to believe anything different, whether it was religion or politics or morals, whatever. If you were different than Hitler, you were wrong, according to them. Now, it's important that we note that the communists are being persecuted because this directly affects Liesel. Liesel is not a communist. She's 8. She doesn't really have any politics. But her parents were communists, and that's ultimately why she ends up in foster care, because her mother can no longer keep her. Historical time period, it's Nazi Germany, 1939. The year is very important. And because it's set in World War II, or gave it away, but because it's set in 1939, we know that part of the story is going to include World War II and the Holocaust. To write a story about Nazi Germany in 1939 without mentioning World War II or the Holocaust would kind of be like writing a story about 2020 and just not mentioning the pandemic, so it would be very difficult. Time passed. There's 2 to 3 days. They don't spend very long there. They bury Werner, and then they take a train to Munich. So this is definitely a minor setting. But she doesn't spend a lot of time there. But because of what happened at the graveyard, how long do you think she'll remember it? Probably forever, because that's where she buried her brother. Now, the second setting is Himmel Street, and it got cut off in the scanner But make sure you know that Himmel means heaven. Now, this is ironic because as we're going to see in the setting, Himmel Street is not very heaven-like. Now, it's set in Molking, Germany. Molking is the name of the town. It's a German name. It's a very small town. And then to get more specific, she lives in the Huberman house, which is in a poorer section of town. The people who live on Himmel Street do not have a lot. And so physical is going to be very similar because we're still in the same season when we get there. So if you just want to draw an arrow to this box, I am okay with that. Same thing for this one. It's still Nazi Germany politics. Communists are still being persecuted. Not much has changed in between leaving the graveyard and getting here. But the only thing that we added was right here next to, or underneath it. We talked about the environment of Huberman household. How would you describe that environment now that she's moved in with Rosa and Hans? And we said it's definitely rougher, largely in part to Rosa, who cusses all the time. She's a very, very angry little woman. Now for historical, we still are dealing with the same thing. Nazi Germany, 1939, World War II, and the Holocaust. The only thing that we're going to add is, now that she's living on Himmel Street, she's going to have to deal with the Allied air raids. The Allied forces throughout World War II would bomb Germany. And so now that she lives in the city, this is going to be something that she has to deal with. She didn't have to deal with this at the graveyard because they weren't trying to bomb graveyards, but they are trying to bomb cities. Excuse me. Now, as far as time goes, this is a major setting. She spends a lot of time at the Hubermans. But the author also uses lots of flashbacks and lots of foreshadowing. And that is the end of page 7. Okay, make sure that you have these notes. Again, if you need to pause, if you need to scroll back, do that. Just make sure that you have them down. If you have any questions, please message me. I know that your page 8 looks, whoops, dang it. Your page 8 looks like this. We are not going to use page 8, so you can leave it blank. Thanks. Hope you have a good day.